let's turn the slides off. And I would say, yeah, welcome Finn again. And welcome to our fireside chat. As I said, I'm really excited to have you with us tonight. Maybe just to start things, maybe you can kind of give us a little bit of a background of how everything actually kind of how you started kind of your journey back then as a young boy growing up or in Flensburg, I think, right?
Yes, exactly.
Great.
Well, I can say a few words. I was actually founding my first company already in school. So in 2000, and let me think about it, 2000, I think it was exactly in 2000, I worked as a freelance web developer. So I created websites for small businesses in my hometown. And at some point, me and a friend realized, why do we just build businesses like websites for other people? Why don't we do things ourselves? And we decided to create an online marketplace for used sports goods. So a bit what eBay Kleinanzeigen in Germany is today. So we created that. It was back in the days called sportsecondhand24.de. So even from today's perspective, it's a very complex website. It was actually my first endeavor in startups. I was actually 17 years old. I got a bit of money saved, but I got a bit of money from my parents. Friend had some money. We printed some flyers. We created the website. And I think while this was not successful, obviously, unfortunately, it really made me hooked on really creating something myself. And I think that was a long journey that I did during my life. When I then actually finished school and did my high school exam, I went to university. Even there, I was always like interested in learning more about business, how to create businesses. Then actually, when I left university, it was not my immediate thought to start something myself. I instead became a very risk-averse consultant. Like I was working for the Boston Consulting Group for 4 years. And I really realized during that time, everyone around me is creating startups, but I'm somehow still stuck at BCG. And at some point at BCG, I was thinking, really self-reflective, what is it that really makes me happy? Is it telling other people what they could do and recommending them things and doing advisory and telling them what kind of concepts they could implement? Or is my real passion in life creating things myself, building up things myself, and instead of consulting other people, rather doing things myself? And I think I clearly answered for me that I really love to do things myself. And then in 2011, Oliver Zamber, back in the days, CEO of Rocket Internet, called me and asked me if I want to do something, building a company up for him. And then I founded The Iconic, and that's basically the Zalando of Australia and New Zealand. And that's how my startup career started. And since then, I never got off the hook anymore.
That sounds impressive. And like, what, like if you could do it over again, or obviously now things have changed, and like the whole entrepreneurial, like even there are universities where you can study entrepreneurship, which I think is a joke. But I mean, what can you do? I think like it's nevertheless a good way to encourage young people for the entrepreneurial spark. But if you would do, like, what would you change if you would do things over again, like start earlier, or like start something on your own, or join a startup, like if you were like really at the beginning of your career path?
Well, to be honest, if I look back, I really enjoyed being thrown into the cold water, because you have to imagine, as a consultant, you actually come with suit and tie every day to your clients. You basically sit a lot on Excel and PowerPoint and create concepts and strategies. And that is something that I think helped me to a certain degree to learn the tools that are really helpful in creating startups. I don't want to say that Excel and PowerPoint is everything you need, but it definitely helps you well along the way. If I would do something different, I would have started either working in a startup or creating my own startup even earlier. So back at BCG, I always made a list of things that I liked with my bosses and things I didn't like with my bosses. I didn't do that to judge them, but it always was a list for me to see how I can improve myself and what kind of boss I want to become. So I wish I would have done the same in a startup. And before I start my own startup, which happened then suddenly, I wish I would have worked at least once in a startup to really make the same kind of notes to myself and see what is running good in a startup, what is not. But on the other hand, it was also a great experience to just be thrown in cold water and just do my own learning curve. So if I would do anything differently, it would probably be that I would have spent less time in consulting, and instead of doing 5 years, maybe just do 2 years to learn really the basic tools, and then rather work for 1 or 2 years in a startup to learn then how startups work, and then found myself. But at the end, come see, come some. So there are no hard feelings about there are no hard feelings or regrets about my past.
Do you think that is there actually a specific time, or like when does a founder know, or like when does a person know now it's actually time for me, kind of I'm ready, so to say, to found my company? Because maybe you also know that some people, and like sometimes also when I look back, can be, oh, I need to start, but I need to get ready to that, right? And then you get ready to get ready to get ready, and then it never really happens, right? So do you have any, like, what would you say from your experience, when is a good start, or when is what is kind of the fine line when you should just start and jump in the cold water, so to say?
Yeah.
Right?
I have a very disappointing answer for you. And the answer is every person is different. So I can tell you today, we just had board meeting this morning. So the whole investment board of Sanity Group came together, and we pitched some of the projects that we really believe have strategic value over the next 3 to 4 years. And I think we did our homework, and based on the homework, we said, we want to do that, full stop. So, and then the investors are like, well, but did you do a due diligence? Did you look at the details? Have you considered this? Have you considered that? And then we said, like, no, I think we're confident enough. We don't need that. So to make a long story short, the board at the end sent us back and said, please do more preparation. And in 2 weeks from now, prepare us a better way of doing like the decision. And the reason why I'm telling you this little story from today is because at the end, it shows you how different people need different information to make decisions. So for example, I'm definitely by now, I would say I've not been like this 5 years ago, but by now I'm the kind of guy, I need 3 data points, I need a good gut feeling, and then I'm doing things. So also when I do angel investments, I look at the founders, I look at the business model, I think about it, I listen to my gut feeling, and then I'm doing it. So, but this makes me definitely more on the side of someone who crosses the line to become an entrepreneur very early. While there are other people, like, for example, the investor I mentioned this morning in my board meeting, he's probably someone that would consider and chew on an idea and then do it again and then think about it. And it takes a lot more time to get him comfortable than it would get me comfortable. And I think at the end, everyone has to decide for himself when this right moment is of founding. I can tell you, if it takes too long, probably founding is not the right thing to do for you. I'm not judging anyone, but I give you one example. My old flatmate was also BCG consultant. He really wanted to become a founder. And by the time, like probably 1 month after we lived together, I left him because I founded then the Iconic. And I haven't really talked to him during that time because it was a very wild time. And 2 years later, I met him and said, like, man, Moritz, did you found something at the end? And it's like, no, I'm still for 2 years in a sabbatical. I'm putting Post-its all over my apartment of different business ideas. I evaluate it. I see what's relevant. And then when I think something is good, I decide suddenly, maybe it's not good. So I'm still in the ideation phase. And that is the moment when I think if you're like this from a character perspective, that it takes you so long to make a decision to found something, it's probably too late. And maybe you should consider not being the right guy who does that. Because one of my old mentors always told me, a bad decision on a Monday is better than a good decision on a Friday. Why? Because if the bad decision is bad, you can redo it by Tuesday, and you still have 4 times ahead from the guy who does the right decision on Friday. And that's the reason why I think, especially in entrepreneurship, you should probably commit fast and rather decide fast instead of turning that path too long. Everyone is different, but I just think like it makes you probably a bit more entrepreneurial if you're able to make this decision quicker.
Yeah, I think like even like what is making a decision, it's all also about a commitment, right? And then it's all about the execution and being fast.
Exactly.
But, and how long, like how long would you say like was the whole Iconic project? And because I've seen, and obviously you also did, I'm also like a big beer fan. So the Berliner Berg is like a brewery that you started or co-founded, or like what, like how was a bit like the path on a continuous basis then?
Yeah, I mean, the Iconic was really something that I never intended to do. It was something. I was 5 years at BCG. I became a project leader by that time. I wanted to go back to Germany and see what my next career step at BCG would be. I considered actually going to New York to actually do the next career step, become partner at BCG. But as I mentioned at the beginning, I really felt that I rather like doing things than consulting. And then when the call came from Rocket Internet, I was really considering it very quickly. And I think 2 days later, I made the decision. So again, that's something where others probably would chew and get references and think about it for another 3 weeks. But I just said like, well, I have nothing to lose. Let's do it. And when I did that, I really committed to something that I had no idea about. So for 2 years, I was really in the Iconic. I was one of the co-founders, but more or less the CEO of the company. And it was really from 0 employees to, at the end, 550. It was from 0 revenues to 200 million. It's from 0 to become the biggest online fashion company in Southeast Asia. So that was really, really, really a cool journey. But one thing that I decided for myself, because you have to think 5 years at BCG, out of which half was in Australia, plus then another almost 3 years at the Iconic. At some point, I really missed Germany and I really wanted to go back to Europe. My friends, my family, everyone was in Europe. And it was for me a very big step to leave my baby, if you want to put it like this, which I have to a certain degree created. However, it was for me the point in time where I realized if I stay in Australia now, I will probably stay forever. If I go back to Europe now, I will become a European again. And that was at the end my decision. And I wanted to go back to Europe, and also Rocket Internet restructured the fashion ventures during that time a bit. So from the Iconic, which was a standalone company, they created the Global Fashion Group, which is the holding company of all the fashion companies. The Global Fashion Group got a new CEO. And I thought at this point in time, it was a good moment to leave, because now from a decentral structure, we go more to a central structure. Then Rocket Internet made me the offer of playing such a role, either in Rocket Internet or at Global Fashion Group. But by that time, I already decided that I want to move to ProSiebenSat.1, the big German TV network. And the good thing about that was because they wanted to recreate something like Rocket Internet. They wanted to do incubation themselves. Back in the days, it was called Epic Companies. And after seeing an incubator from an entrepreneur perspective, like being an entrepreneur under the Rocket umbrella, I thought it would be cool to create the umbrella yourself. And I did that. Epic Companies for about, let's say, 2.5 years in Berlin. Was a really interesting time. However, the idea that ProSieben had back in the days to recreate something like Rocket Internet with a very thin budget and only supported by TV, I think that really never came to reality as we planned it. I mean, we did great investments and created great companies, like many of you might know Amorelie, the online love toys company, or for example, Gimondo, which is an online gym. So there were definitely great companies coming out of Epic. However, I realized also back in that time, an incubator at the end is nothing else but a consultancy, because at the end you want to have founders in the incubator who have their own opinions. And at that moment, as a guy who runs the incubator, you become a consultant again, because you can tell the founder what you think he needs to be doing, but at the end, the decision is made by the founder. So that's the reason why I left that and decided that I really want to create my own business again. And that was when Berliner Berg was created. So it was never meant to be Berliner Berg is the craft beer brewery. So it was never meant to.
I tried it already, by the way. It's very much recommended.
We had it actually at the startup right in Munich. Exactly.
I know.
And it was really like, it was definitely thought as a hobby/side topic. However, it suddenly became so big that I really invested a lot of time and energy in that. However, for me, it was clear that I wanted to do something digital again. And that's the reason why I had some ideas about my own businesses. And then at some point, I decided to join a company called Movinga, which was then, I was still the MD of co-founder of Berliner Berg, but we were two co-founders. We hired a team around us, and it was never meant to be a full-time project. So I moved to Movinga, which is an online moving platform, to become the first the MD, but then afterwards the CEO. But Berliner Berg, the craft beer brewery, I mean, they survived Corona. They do more revenues than ever, more than 2 million this year. They got a huge investment, or we got a huge investment by Jägermeister, the German spirits brand. Now we just created our own brewery in Berlin. So if once we do at some point physical events again, there's an amazing beer garden in the middle of Neukölln next to the brewery where you can do amazing beer tasting. So next time we can actually hopefully
Location for our next event.
do it there. Exactly. Exactly. But then, I mean, the brewery is still a topic that's close to my heart, even though I don't do it operationally anymore. But then obviously with Movinga, I got the next big thing, which we talked about last Startup Grind, which was more a restructuring case than a growth case, which I didn't know back then, but that was actually the last step before I founded the Sanity Group.
Mm-hmm. Maybe obviously we need to not to deep dive into Movinga, but maybe as a, like in a nutshell, like for people who actually don't know the background story, because that's, I would also refer them back to the chat that you had with Sabine from Startup Grind Munich. But for yourself, like obviously it was an interesting time. What were like the most memorable moments for you that shaped you also now with the Sanity Group, or some learnings that you want to apply like from your insights?
Yeah, I mean, I should write a book about that. So I just try to filter in my head right now the top 3 learnings. I mean, just to give you in the audience a bit of a background in case you don't know the Movinga story. The background is a bit, when I got hired at Movinga, and I will remember the sentence until the rest of my life, I was not sure if I really want to do something myself because I had an idea by that time, or if I would join a startup that already existed as the third managing director next to the co-founders. So the thing is, when I joined Movinga, it was not a restructuring case. So when I joined Movinga, what it was basically a growth case, and I was hired by the investors to support the founders in further scaling the company. Unfortunately, the reality was once I joined, I realized that the company is not at all what the investors expected it to be. So the numbers were not really making sense. There were already too many people on the payroll that no one had control about. The burn rate was too high. The financing were a catastrophe, and the company was losing money on a much higher rate than anyone expected. So it ended up 2 months later that I was the one who had to let the founders go, and suddenly I was the CEO of the company. And that's the not so. Well, it's a very, very good area, part of my life in terms of learning experience, but it was a tough time in terms of work-life balance and happiness in work. It was restructuring a company of 500 employees over a period of 3 years and really making it not profitable, but from a burn rate of 5 million per month to at least down to a few 100,000 per month. And that, if you think about what the learning experience is, I think number one, finance is one of the most important functions you should have under control from day one. Never neglect that. Never say, oh, finance is something we care about later. It's super important because if you scale or grow too much and you don't have a finance department in place, it's horrible. The second thing is that I learned, always play open cards with your investors. Don't think you can fix something around and hope that no one realizes and at the end everything explodes, because that's what the founders did. So by now I don't think that the founders had bad intentions, but they were always thinking they had troubles and they could actually solve them without involving the investors, and they were hoping to survive that. So that obviously didn't really happen that way. And the third thing, what I also understood is really, and this is again a bit of financing focused, really have your run rate under control. I mean, that's something that at Rocket Internet I never really thought about, because at Rocket Internet you get kind of a flat rate for money flowing in, no matter how much you burn. If you have a normal business and you have like an investment from investors, make sure that this investment lasts. Make sure that you don't need to raise funds again after 6 months or 12 months. Always try to actually focus on an 18 months to 24 months time frame, because only that time frame allows you to really grow with that money, to reach milestones over time, and not to run out of cash before you can actually prove anything. And that's the thing that I also had to learn. Focus on the things that are really value creating, and don't do 15 times at the same time if some of them are not value creating.
Yeah, to the point of having focus. I mean, like, it's just, for me, it's like always funny when I look at kind of your LinkedIn, right? It's like you have been involved into like so many different like projects, right? I mean, also like even like apart from Sanity Group now, but also just before, right? So I would be just curious. I mean, like, do you have any strategies also for our community how do you keep focus while at the same time always being open for new chances, right? And also saying yes to some of these changes, right?
So, as you just commented correctly on my LinkedIn, I'm unfortunately a guy who loves to say yes more than no. There are definitely people who are the other way around, who love. There are definitely people also in my direct environment who say no all the time, and yes, just very few times. So I think it comes back to your question in the beginning: what kind of guy do you have to be to become a successful entrepreneur? I don't want to say that every entrepreneur has to say yes all the time, but the thing is, and this is like a downside of my character too, I see the opportunity in everything and the risk in almost nothing. And that actually always makes me my thoughts flying like, oh, if I'm joining that initiative, I could do so much stuff already, and I could do so many good things for the community, for startup scene, for everything. And that's the reason why I'm rather tending towards doing, unfortunately, a little bit too much and not too little. So while I learned the lesson in Movinga for business purposes, like focus and really focus on the things that brings you value, sometimes on the private side, I'm still struggling with managing all the different things that I'm saying yes to, and then suddenly making sure that my commitment is actually meaning anything. And that's a lesson I still have to learn from time to time. But generally, I think an entrepreneur is someone who by nature wants to do a lot of things and has to force himself to focus. And I think if you manage that as an entrepreneur, I think it's one of the main things you can achieve.
And that is also one of the reasons why you got awarded the Founder of the Year 2021 award, among other things.
Maybe that's the reason. I don't know.
Only this is the reason, Finn.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's definitely, it's like the characteristics, as you totally said correctly, like what makes a great founder is like having, like being a jack of all trades and mastering a lot of things well. But now, obviously, since you have a wide ranging background and interest fields, I was actually wondering, like now, since we come obviously then to the topic of the whole evening with like the Sanity Group, like how comes, or like what really sparked your interest that you went into the whole cannabis space? I'm a total newbie into that, but was just curious to hear whether we can maybe also start a bit on a terminology ground, just like, okay, CBD, THS and all this stuff, like where we at, like what do you do, and give us a bit of an introduction maybe.
So first of all, I think maybe to your initial question, when did it start with me and cannabis? Even though it always sounds odd to say that, it was definitely when I was 17. And now, I mean, if you Google me or read something about me, it's pretty clear that I'm a member of a political party. And I'm surprising to many that I meet. I'm a member of the CDU, of the Conservative Party in Germany, and I have been already as a young person. However, I've always been a very liberal part of the CDU, like my whole life already. And during the time I was active as a youth, let's say when I was 16, 17, during the same time I founded my first company, I was actually the leader of the so-called Junge Union, Young Union, the young association of the Conservative Party in Northern Germany. And I had some friends who had parents that needed cannabis as a medication. Let's put it like this. And back in the days, it was unheard of in Germany that you could get cannabis as a medication. However, other countries like Israel or even Canada, or even in certain perspectives, for example, Luxembourg and Australia, already had programs in place where you could get cannabis if you, for example, if you're a fatal patient who has like cancer in the last stage or pain management. So back in the days, it was possible in Germany to get a prescription for cannabis in very, very, very little, for very little reasons. I think during that time, there were like 5 or 10 official patients in Germany for medical cannabis. And I was actually thinking how unfair this was. And I saw how much actually like the mother of the friend of mine has multiple sclerosis. So she needed it. I also knew someone who had cancer in the last stage, and he illegally organized it for himself. Ironically, it was a doctor. So during that time, I was really thinking about how come that the CDU, my party, is looking at cannabis so negatively and so conservatively, when I see on the other hand, people in my life that this plant really seemed to be helping. So during that time, I was doing a lot of research, the nerd that I am sometimes. I talked to pharmacists, I talked to doctors, I talked to patients. I even talked to an association, which is for pain patients, about what they think about it. And at some point, I decided for myself, I think this should be a topic of the CDU as well. We should actually stand for the legalization of medical cannabis. So you can even read old papers that I wrote back in 2001, 2002. There's still a website online called cannabislegal.de where you see all my papers that I handed in into the political context in 2002. But as you can imagine, I was unfortunately not successful. So while I stopped my efforts back then and stopped being an activist, but on the other hand, still being interested in this topic, in 2017 suddenly, the government was allowing medical cannabis. So 15 years later, after I tried, the government, if I want to be arrogant, I followed my recommendation, but obviously it was not like this. They had different reasons for legalizing it. But 15 years later, it became legal. And that was a moment in time when I was just done with the Movinga restructuring. And I really thought for myself, I have the passion for cannabis since I'm 17. I also have the passion for building companies on the same time. And is there something I can do to combine those two passions of mine and really create something new? During that time, I had a tiring 3 years restructuring of Movinga behind me. And I was really, really thinking very often during that time, Movinga is not my baby. I didn't found that company myself. I was just a normal employee as a CEO. I didn't even have a lot of shares in the company. I really had the feeling I want to do something at least one more time in my life to create a company on my own again. And the combination with that, plus cannabis being legalized, plus I know my talent is building companies, led to the fact that I decided I want to leave Movinga and I want to create something in that space myself. And for me, being a very digital guy, everything except for Berliner Berg in my life since BCG has always been digital, I was really thinking, is there a digital angle to it? And to make a disclaimer, yes, there are some digital angles to cannabis, but cannabis itself is not a digital topic. So at some point I was really wondering, is it really something I can do or something I want to do? But then I always thought about what is digitalization really? And digitalization for me is disruption of a certain situation. So the reason why digital startups are successful is because they're disrupting an analog mindset and they create something online that hasn't been online before. And to a certain degree, cannabis is kind of the same. You have traditional pharmaceuticals for pain management, for oncology, for schizophrenia, for depression. All those medications work, some better, some worse. But very often, especially when you did a therapy for many years in terms of pain, at some point these things don't work anymore. And cannabis, and that's what I saw back in the days already, can really play a role here. So the reason why I did this at the end was because I wanted to disrupt the way how people think about pharmaceuticals and medication, and I wanted actually people to benefit from the alternative that they receive, the natural alternative that they receive during the option of consuming cannabinoids. And that's something that became very close to my heart. This is the reason why I would still call myself almost an activist today. I'm doing a lot of political lobbying, negotiating with politicians, telling them about the advantages of cannabis. And you just mentioned it, Mareike, very quickly. There's a lot of terms, and if you already don't know it, you can believe that our politicians have no idea about them. So what's the difference between CBD and THC? What is a cannabis plant? Why do I sometimes see on the field cannabis plants growing and no one cares? While on the other hand, cannabis is sometimes, if you possess it, it's illegal by law and you go to prison. So there's a lot of topics, and if you want to, I can elaborate a bit further. But that's kind of how I came into the story of why I created a cannabis company. And this is something that remains very close to my heart.
I mean, I would love to learn more. Also, like if you guys also drop your comments in the chat. But as I said, I'm a total newbie. So if you just give like a dumbed down version, or like how would you describe like what the Sanity Group and like the whole terminology is like to a 7-year-old?
Okay, good. So Mareike, let's pretend you're 7 years old now. So there is this family of plants, and this family of plants you can summarize under the name hemp. Mm-hmm. What many people don't know, by the way, is that hemp and hops are very much related. So sometimes when you open up a Beck's beer and you close your eyes and you smell the Beck's beer coming out of the bottle, it very much smells like cannabis. Why? Because Beck's has a green bottle. It means it reacts with the light. And the hops are so related to cannabis in terms of the family of the plant that it smells the same. So hemp is a family of plants. within those hemp family, you have different strains. So one strain, for example, is the industrial hemp strains. So that's the thing that you see on the field. What makes them special? They normally possess a bit of CBD, like normally 5%, and 0.2% of THC, which is the cannabinoid that makes you high or is a narcotic. And besides those industrial hemp families, you have a lot of other hemps, like it's called strains. You, for example, have Gorilla Glue, it's a strain. You have Amnesia Haze, it's a strain, and so on. And so you can imagine under that family, you have a lot of different plants. And what those plants have all in common, they have all of them around 110 active ingredients that are somehow reacting with your body. Mm-hmm. So each of your bodies has a system. It was explored in 1990 in Israel, the so-called endocannabinoid system. So it means you have a system in your body that regulates stress, that regulates sleep, that regulates a lot of other things. And this system is in your body, and it creates so-called endocannabinoids. So it means your body is creating molecules themselves to regulate itself. If you, for example, ever ran a marathon, you might have had the runner's high afterwards. So after finishing the marathon, you feel like being high, you feel like being like completely like wow from the world. So what happens in your body, the system overproduces a certain endocannabinoid. This endocannabinoid is amandamide, and it's 95% similar to THC. So it means your body makes you high by creating that. So many people who suffering under stress or anxiety or sleep, they do that because they have a malfunctioning in their endocannabinoid system. And what the Israelis found out in the 1990s is that so-called exocannabinoids, so cannabinoids that you put into your body from the outside, can help you to regulate your system and therefore sleep better, have less stress, regenerate better, and so on. And these active ingredients of the cannabis plant are called exocannabinoids or cannabinoids, and CBD is one of them. This is more research-wise on the relaxation and regenerator side. Then you have THC, which is another cannabinoid that makes you high. So that is actually the one that helps against pain, but also against depression and some other indications. You have then CBG that is very promising, but not yet really explored in studies. And then you have 107 more of them. So what we did from the beginning in the Sanity Group, we saw the endocannabinoid system being the basis of everything we want to do. And so what we did, we looked at all the studies, all the research, and we looked at where so-called exocannabinoids can help your human system to improve and be healthier. And we realized very quickly there are two paths. One is the pure medical path. That is really including THC, that's prescription. It's narcotic, like you have to have storage area with 2 meters thick walls that protect the cannabis from being stolen. So that obviously you can imagine are the high THC strains that are mostly prescribed for pain control. And then you have the whole other side, that's all the non-psychoactive cannabinoids like CBD, CBG, and CBC, CBN, and many more. And they have different roles. And what we created from the beginning is two areas within Sanity Group. One, Sanity Medical, really bringing things to the doctors and making them prescribed through the pharmacies. And the second thing we did was always the CBD or non-psychoactive side, where we create products for well-being that on smaller dosages help people to actually sleep better, relax better, and so on. And that is until today our business model. We have several brands under that, but it really goes from, we offer CBD products for the consumer that goes into DM or Rossmann. On the one extreme to the other extreme, we at the moment create for 50 million euro a new pharmaceutical in a clinical phase 3 trial, which is CBD against schizophrenia, where we have 5,000 patients all over the world who get our compound at the moment tested against the placebo. And our aim is to prove after the third phase of the trial to actually prove that CBD against schizophrenia is evident, and that's the reason why we want to make a finished pharmaceutical out of it, which at the end is similar to Viagra or other stuff that you get prescribed by the doctor as a pill. So, and this whole spectrum is very wide, but that's basically everything we do at the Sanity Group.
Yeah, and it's probably also
I hope I didn't sound like I'm too much like a lecturer who wants to give you a lecture about cannabis.
No, Olga, we asked for it, right? So, so we can't complain now. No, that's great. But also now, just when you think about like the startup landscape in the whole cannabis industry, like what are other like players out there, and where do you actually see the biggest potential also for disrupting this market?
Yeah, so you see, like, I think the potential is not to disrupt my competitors. The potential is to disrupt the big pharmaceutical companies and a few other companies. So if you think about it, in the US, you're much further down the line. I mean, cannabis is much clearer regulated. Also on the medical side, it's much more liberal in terms of what's possible and what's not. In Canada, it's even one phase further, so you're allowed to even like use cannabis as an adult use product, like as a recreational product. So obviously, Germany is a bit behind. So the most startups you see here in Germany are either CBD brands who push products into the market, or medical cannabis wholesalers who basically buy flowers from somewhere and then push it into the pharmacies. I believe these business models are valuable, and partly we're doing them ourselves. However, it's only benefiting from a market that's already there. That market is growing, but it's nothing really disruptive. So the thing that we see, for example, in Israel has a lot of cannabis startups, and all of them there are research oriented. They really like look into research. They found new ways of creating clinical trials. They look for cannabinoids into technology, digital health. How can you actually combine that with cannabinoid therapies? And I think that is really something where we in Germany are very behind. We are very much focusing only on the market perspective, like how much revenues can we do by selling these things. But we focus very little on growing the market by doing more research, more studies, developing more therapies, developing new therapies. So, for example, at the moment, we do another clinical trial for endometriosis, which is a disease that I think every 10th woman has in Germany. It's an infection in your what's Gebärmutter in English? You know, no one knows. Okay, it's an infection in your stomach, a chronic infection. CBD is supposed to be anti-inflammatory, and there are very good clinical results to show that CBD can be used against endometriosis, but no one has done the research before. So that's what we are doing, for example, similar to regeneration after sports. So due to the anti-inflammatory effect, CBD can really play a big role, and many sports people are doing it. For example, Mario Götze is our investor because he takes it already for a long time to regenerate after sport. And I think this whole area about innovation, disrupting research, from the research create new products, create new therapies. I think that's the sweet spot where I believe the industry will go to over the next 1 to 2 years. And I think that's the most attractive field to play in. Even though obviously only the selling companies also have their value, and someone needs to sell it to the patients and customers. But I think the real differentiation is through research and being innovative in that space.
Yeah, and Finn, you already mentioned it, that obviously also regulation is probably one of the biggest challenges also in pushing like the whole cannabis market also in Germany, and obviously also within the CDU. But just when you general also have a when you just generally think about marketing like the whole Sanity Group, or like generally like cannabis products, like how would you say, like what is kind of also the awareness of people, because not everyone is so educated, right, also about the medical side of cannabis, stuff like this. So maybe you can also elaborate a bit more on how you kind of do the marketing, or what were also like big challenges in that industry to raise the awareness for that like positive sides of it as well, right?
Yeah, so we have certain challenges. You already mentioned them a few. The funny thing is, if you would ask the German population, what do they think about, let's say, CBD, for example? And CBD, as I just mentioned, is an ingredient of the cannabis plant. It can help. There are studies around it. You can make products with it, yada, yada, yada. But if you really ask 100% of the German population, do you think CBD is good for you? I can tell you 40% are saying, oh my God, no, this is cannabis, this is a drug, I would never touch it. Then there's the other 40% that says like, that's just a new trend ingredient, doesn't bring anything. I even see chips with cannabis in the supermarket right now, so I don't believe the bullshit. And only 20% in the middle say, oh yeah, that's exactly what I need and I believe it helps me. So now the question is, generally in education, which side do you target first? Do you want to target the ones who say like, oh God, this is bad for me, or this is too much? Do you tell them, no, when you microdose it, it doesn't do anything negative to you, it's only good for you? And do you try to convince the people who don't believe or who are afraid of cannabis today that CBD is okay? Or do you focus rather on the people who say CBD are bullshit? It's like, it's nothing in there, it's next trend ingredients like chia seeds or whatever, and you convince them with studies that CBD can actually do something. So that is actually the question I ask myself every single day, because both groups are very persistent on their opinion. I think the one group you can only convince with studies and showing that actually CBD is here to stay as an ingredient. The other side, you need to convince by the fact that cannabis is not as bad as they might think. And there's a reason why also medical therapies are done with cannabis. But this education in general, I would say, is our biggest challenge, because if you ask the average German person, they still perceive cannabis as something bad. And I think that's a mindset I want to change. Cannabis has been a health or a medical plant for over 3,000 years, similar to, by the way, aspirin, which was a bark from an oak tree, or not an oak tree, but a birch tree, I think, back in the days. It was a natural remedy that people already took 3,000 years ago to clean their wounds, to make it anti-inflammatory, to actually brew it when they had headaches. They put it on actually fevers and everything. And it was used for 3,000 years. Even in Germany in the 1500s, the monks and the nuns in the monasteries were using cannabis, growing it in their gardens for medical purposes. And only in the 1930s, 1940s, cannabis suddenly became this dangerous drug. And everyone said, like, oh my God, no, cannabis, it's dangerous. And to bring that back to the time before that, so my grandmother was still able to buy cannabis in the pharmacy in the 1930s. Very normal. Like, you could just go to the pharmacy and said, I want a THC extract, please. Yes, here's my money. Thank you. That's done. So, and we forget this sometimes, that this has been a real medical support in the 2,900 years before we made it a drug. And I think that's one challenge. And then the second challenge, and that's very much connected, is that not only the population sees it that way, but also the regulators see it that way. So it's almost impossible to do advertising for cannabis, like not on Google, not on Facebook, not on Instagram. They do everything to shut you down when you even try to do it. The next thing is most of the payment providers don't allow you to use it for cannabis. Like we negotiated 2 years with PayPal until they finally accepted us to use PayPal on our website. It took us almost 1.5 years to get the first credit card provider accepting us. And the same is true for regulatory. So everything we do is completely legal. Still, once every 3 months, the authorities come to our place, pull products from our storage facility, and they try to prove that what we're doing is not legal. Every time we win, but it's really, you see, there's a big skepticism towards this plant in the society, and this is really culturally induced. And one of my, I think, big life goals is to really change that in the German society. The second thing I think is also, and this is a big fear that also regulators have, they are afraid if people use CBD products and are happy with it, and this is not a conspiracy theory, that's the truth, and I'm talking to regulators every day, if they see that people go to the DM, to the Rossmann, and they buy CBD products, they're happy with it, and they tell their friends, oh, look, I take cannabis oil, it's so amazing, the regulator is afraid that people suddenly don't think bad about cannabis anymore and neglecting the risk that cannabis bears as a drug. And there I'm kind of understand it, because obviously I'm not in favor of young people misusing cannabis as a drug, especially when they are still in development and not fully grown yet, which is normally under 18 or 20. I'm fully with them. However, just because if I'm 17 again, just because my mom is happy using a cannabis oil for her pain, doesn't mean that I actually are even more inclined to smoke weed myself. So I actually think that the regulator, unfortunately, is a bit over conscious or a bit over concerned here. But again, that's the reason why we do a lot of public affairs, because we really want to change that in the German mindset, not only German, but also European mindset, to make sure that people rather see the opportunity in cannabis and not only the risk.
And what would you like, maybe like even speaking of concrete steps, or like even also like the future outlook, what would you say, what needs to happen that like this whole thing like is changing, right? So I can make a wish, let's say it like that.
So, I mean, to be honest, as I said, cannabis as a product is used for 3,000 years. There are documents of like monks brewing beers with cannabis in Germany. There are documents of like doctors in the 18th century, like baking cookies with cannabis to treat patients. I think the first thing that needs to happen is that we recognize the truth and understand that cannabis is not the big devil that is destroying the world, but rather something that can help here and there, but obviously needs to be regulated well. So I think that's a mindset perspective. the consequence out of that, and unfortunately politicians are always a bit behind the general population, is to understand politicians, make them understand that a good regulation of cannabis is only bringing benefits to the government. Even like the medical side is actually saving a lot of costs on the health insurance side. I gave you just one example. We did a study together with one member of our advisory board 2 years ago. It was running. So tell me if I'm too nerdy deep dive, but you have in Germany shitloads of chronic pain patients. So what does it mean? These are patients, they can be 40 years old, and they know every single day until the end of their life, they will suffer under pain. And the thing is, for these patients, there's only one path. And the path is 2 years after they have chronic pain, they go into depression. So out of a cohort that goes into chronic pain, the rate of people go into depression after 2 years is almost 95%. So now actually we did an example of it was the idea of the scientist on board, but he did the study. And what he did is he gave new chronic pain patients, besides the normal medication, he gave cannabis on top. Only 10% of those cohort of chronic pain patients fell into depression after 2 years. So it means you have almost 90% less depression patients than you had before. To communicate that and tell politicians, look, if you allow the use of cannabis a bit further, it will save long-term costs in the health system, is something that I think no one really understands yet. And that is so sad because, again, everyone just thinks about the risk. But what I mean when you ask me, like, what needs to change, I think the regulator, and what I mean with that is the politicians, need to understand that it is an opportunity and not only a risk, which is unfortunately typical German to see it the other way around. And we have to actually find regulations that, first of all, allow medical cannabis use on a wider base than we allow it today. We need a regulation that regulates CBD in terms of when can you use CBD as a nutritional supplement and when does it have to be a pharmaceutical, and that's based on dosage. And then in my opinion, but that's not Sanity Group opinion, that's my personal opinion, I think the government should sometimes get the stick out of the backside and allow for model regions to test also the recreational use of cannabis, because the results that we see in Canada 3 years after regulation, the results that we see in Uruguay 3 years after regulation are all so positive in terms of how much the government earns with additional taxes. For example, in Oregon, with the tax money the government got after legalizing cannabis, 400 new schools were built and 500 were renovated. And it tells you how much that can also do. And the result is not more people are smoking than before. They just smoke regulated and legal goods and not illegal goods anymore. And the second thing is the police has better things to do than pursue cannabis users that are there anyways and can focus instead of that on more important topics. And I think that is all part of the same problem. It is the mindset of politicians, and I think we need to change that. But I think hand in hand with that, we also have to change the mindset of the population. But again, that's my opinion. I'm a cannabis activist. So also, if you completely disagree in the audience here and say, like, what the fuck is he saying? Please raise your hand, and I'm very happy to have a discussion.
Yeah, I was also messaging with Hubert, who's in the audience, and even he messaged me back like, okay, why start a cannabis business in Germany, like in the first place, right? Because he was even saying like, hi, I mean, competitors in Canada or other places can go full speed ahead, while in Germany you have to hop around and one leg with your hands tied behind your back. And if you're unlucky, this might be literally, not just metaphorically speaking.
Yeah, I mean, but that again comes back to the startup mindset, right? I mean, you want to focus on the big problems, not on the small problems. I mean, of course, I could have created a cannabis company in Canada. I would have been probably the 1,510th person who would be doing that. And it would be kind of easy. And there it would be more like what makes me stand out compared to the other companies. I think in Germany, it's really, we are still one of the first ones, and we are definitely perceived as the pioneer in this area in Germany. And for us, it's a challenge. I mean, the thing is, like, if the market opens up, it will be immediately one of the biggest markets in the world. And that's the reason why we believe the market potential is there. We believe that there's a change in mindset from politicians and population as well. And after all, you always need to think that we are a medical cannabis company, and believe it or not, and that is still surprising 3 years later, telling you that Germany is really among the most liberal countries in the world when it comes to medical cannabis. It's not because the government decided that, by the way. It's because one of those patients I mentioned went to the highest law court of Germany, the High Court, the Bundesverfassungsgericht, in 2017 to sue the government saying, I need cannabis. The doctor says I need cannabis. You don't give me cannabis. So if you don't give it to me, I want to be growing it myself. And then the highest law court in Leipzig said suddenly, yes, this person has the right to grow cannabis himself. And then the government panicked and said, fuck, this brings a huge precedent, because if he gets the permission to grow himself, then everyone who says they are ill can grow himself. The government wanted to actually avoid that, and that's the reason why they made the German cannabis law, which is until today a very liberal law. So if you're really having chronic pain or other indications, you can go to your local doctor, and if the doctor agrees with you, he gives you a prescription for cannabis, and the health insurance is even paying for it if it's really bringing you big additional value. So, and this is something why I think Germany is still a good market, because it's the biggest European country, plus the most liberal one on the medical space. The question is now how more liberal it will become over the years, but I still think it's a good situation to start a business in.
And Finn, how would you say, like, how does the investment side actually look like in Germany? Like, we saw that you raised the Series A in June. I'm not sure, but like, when, how would you say, like, are there like a lot of investors now realizing kind of the potential, or where are we standing there? And by the way, I'm sorry that I need to walk, but I need to get my charger. So
we don't see really you walking because of the background, but you're moving strangely. So investment-wise, it's difficult. I can tell you why. The Germans or the Euro, how you have to navigate. And I think that's something that we did well, but it was really luck because of our both history. So we knew VCs, but generally I would say for people who start a business completely new from scratch, it's an industry where it's extremely hard to fundraise. Absolutely.
Just on a side note, I think like Verena is dropping in again. That's why you also heard that we. She was moving too fast probably, but she will join us in a second. But I will continue also recording. What I also found quite impressive, since we were speaking about like fundraising or like investors, like how comes, I mean, you already mentioned Mario Götze earlier on. Is that something like, or like, are you going now out with more like influencer strategy, like in the CBD consumer brand, or like, how comes that you attract like investors like will.i.am, Alyssa Milano, Justin Bieber's manager, Scooter Braun, and all these, big venture, investors? Like, what's the strategy behind that? Obviously, you're like you and the co-founder, attractive founding team, but like, what's the strategy behind attracting all these amazing investors?
To be honest, I think it's the big vision. I mean, it's a combination of things. So when you become the cannabis company that all the big VCs invest into, and that's already a big plus, because even though you might not be there from a revenue perspective, people in the public perceive you are the cannabis company, because you are in the press all the time, you attract all these big investments. And I would really say, like, unfortunately, and I mean that it's to my benefit, but it's unfortunately for other founders, one step comes after the other. So you have a trusted founding team, you're known in the industry. The first investors come, then suddenly other investors see like, oh, people are investing in that company, maybe I should do too. So then suddenly the next investors come on board. So after that, actually, you are again in the press, you show the first revenues, and you actually have a big vision for the company. As I said, not only selling CBD products, which is a good business, but nothing very visionary. And then you create a vision around it. And then with the network you have by then and the vision you have, you suddenly have the opportunity to talk to people like Mario Götze or will.i.am, because someone in your network knows someone who knows that this guy is into cannabis. And then suddenly, I can tell you, last year in summer, I was on holidays in France. Suddenly a friend of mine said like, hey, I have a friend who has a friend who has a friend who has a friend who works at Universal Music. He just talked about your business with will.i.am, and will.i.am is super into cannabis, and he wants to invest. I was like, okay, let him talk to me. So, and then suddenly when will.i.am invested, suddenly will.i.am knew Mario Götze because they had a cooperation back in the days with Beats by Dr. Dre. So he told Mario Götze. Mario Götze, wow. Mario Götze told André Schürrle. André Schürrle told Dennis Aogo. Dennis Aogo told Mats Hummels. Then suddenly Mats Hummels knows, for example, Steffi Giesinger very well. So, and suddenly this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is some point, and this is very rare in life, but it was really like an effect where I almost had to do nothing, but suddenly the requests came in, and we were very lucky that we could pick the people we want to work with. And for us, especially with the celebrities, it was very important for us that this is not just a financial investment, but these people really have to believe in the plan. So will.i.am takes CBD for 3 years, and he says without CBD, he wouldn't be able to go on a stage anymore. So for example, Steffi Giesinger, she's completely believes, because she has also cosmetic brands at DM, she completely believes in the cosmetic effects that CBD can have as an anti-inflammatory agent in creams. Mario Götze, André Schürrle, use it for like almost 8 years now, before anyone else even knew about CBD, to regenerate the muscles after sports. And so it was really important to really pick people on our cap table, especially on the celebrity side, that are really passionate about that topic. And I think we managed somehow to do that. But sometimes one thing comes to the other, and it was definitely not that I planned it so crazily to say, we need to have these investors, but it was really a good thing that suddenly came up.
And obviously now, like last month, you finished the next round, like the Series A round. Like what's a bit like? Let's look into the crystal ball. Like what's ahead for the Sanity Group? What are the plans?
So I mean, we just raised the big financing round, and for us, I think we already showed on the revenue side that we can generate revenue. For us, the next big step, the next big step is to really go further into research, because we believe that's the real difference we can make. I think the research about proving that cannabis can do something good is solving a lot of different problems at the same time. The more studies we have to actually show that cannabis works in therapy and can do good for people, the more that the politicians are listening to you. So that's number one. The more studies we do, the more we can convince the people who today say, oh, cannabis is doing nothing, it's a trend ingredient, it doesn't matter. So we can convince those people. On the other hand, it really helps us to develop products that are really working, that then again make patients and customers happy by developing them. And I think that's the reason why the big plan for us, I mean, obviously we will still put full power on the sales side. We will do more countries. We will probably launch more products going forward, but really like to focus the majority of the money that we raised now, the 35 million, on the research side and really investing into clinical trials, studies, and proof that cannabis as a therapy works. That's something that's really close to our heart and super important for us in the path going forward.
Okay, that was very insightful. Obviously, guys, I also want to, I saw Alex posted a good question, so we will shortly also give you guys also the possibility to ask the questions. Also feel free then in the next step to unmute yourself and raise your point. Maybe just a few things that I definitely wanted to address. That was definitely here. You mentioned at the beginning that you're doing angel investing. Tell us all about this. So how can people, connect with you, or like what are you investing in?
So normally I'm very opportunistic when I invest. So I'm definitely not one of the angel investors who does 20 investments per year, but I do quite investments here and there. And what I really love is always passionate founder teams. I have some rules for myself, so I only work with founders who do their stuff full time and not just part time. So that's important for me. I have a certain passion for products. So if you create products in a certain way that improve people's life, I think that's something that I really like. But generally, everything that's product related is something that I really like, because I think it's amazing to create really products that last. But I'm also open towards anything else. So if, for example, someone pitches me an idea, it just happened recently. I cannot say what it is yet, but it was a very cool technological software that helps people living a better life. So I'm very opportunistic in that sense. So really, like if someone pitches me an idea, I will think about it probably for one day, and then I will make the decision if I invest or not. So I will also not do really big due diligences. For me, especially in the early stage, it's at the end the team and the market, and that's it.
And Finn, like how close, and hi, by the way, I'm back.
Hi.
But like how close do you actually work together with your startup? So are you also, like helping them from a strategic point of view, or is it more from the investment side?
Always depends on the startup. So like I will not force my recommendations on the founders if they don't want it. So I really like work after the so-called pull principle here. So if the angels, if the founders need advice and they have certain topics, I schedule regular meetings with them. But I do from time to time like coffee catch-ups, but normally I also motivate them. Hey, think about certain questions you want to discuss, prepare them, and then we can have a coffee or we can have a chat. Because by now I have probably 10, 15 angel investments. And if everyone just wants to have a coffee catch up 1 hour a week, and just like to update you or just to have a small talk, then really I cannot afford it anymore to actually spend so much time on it. So normally it's very important for me to motivate the founders. Hey, sure, I mean, I'm invested in you, so let's keep in touch regularly, but make our encounters as efficient as possible. And yes, let's do a bit of small talk, but then let's really go to the point and see where I can really help you and how I can help you. So, and this has to come from the founder. So that's very important for me.
Finn, anything else also from your side that we have not talked about, but the audience needs to know when it comes to cannabis?
No, I think there's a lot of questions as well in the chat already. So I think one of the things I'm really excited about is the election this autumn, because I mentioned to you already, the mindset in politicians is very slowly, but it is changing. So very interesting, in case you don't know, 6 years ago, out of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parties that were in the German parliament, 4 were against the usage of cannabis at all in any kind of circumstance, and only 1 was voting for it. It was the Greens. Back in the days, the Greens were like a 5% party, and no one listened to them, and all the other parties were against cannabis. This year, the SPD says they are for cannabis and also even for limited legalization. The Greens are still for cannabis, but they are now not 5%, but rather 20%. The Liberals, the FDP, for the first time in history, they put it into the election program that they want to legalize cannabis. And the Greens, the Liberals are at the moment at 12.5% in the votes. And the left wings are for the legalization anyway. It's only the CDU and the AfD who are still against it. So since I very much hope that those 2 parties will not form a coalition, which I hopefully think it's impossible that the AfD and the Union will go together, the Union will be depending on a coalition partner that is in favor of cannabis. And I think that makes it very interesting to see. That's actually the potential I see in the next election. But as I said, this is just a side note, and I'm very curious what will happen, but it can't be worse, so it will be better. So I'm very excited to see what the future brings for us.
Amazing. Okay, then let's do it like that. I also asked Alex if he's willing to unmute himself, show up on camera, because he actually raised a good question. So Alex, feel free to quickly elaborate and ask your question alone.
Hello. So I have 2 questions. The first one is like, I'm seeing that Germany is falling behind after like USA for cars, because Tesla is gaining a lot of market share and more expensive than most of the car companies in Germany. And in China, they just gained the position of the best electrical engineering country, something like this. And we also lost our position as the world leader for export some years ago to China. So I'm seeing like other countries are gaining like more traction, and they are developing new products, and they have more innovation, and Germany does not. So my question is like, do you see after our election in fall this year, do you see any change for this? Do you believe that politicians become more interested in innovation and they will target more innovation? And the second question is like, do you see any areas in which Germany is not losing its advantage to other countries, but gaining more market share compared to, for example, China, USA, and more other countries? Yeah,
so let's start with your first question, because I think it's a very relevant one. I think we are losing track in Germany right now. And the thing is, you know, the government has never been, and I'm actually, I really think that, yeah, the reason why we have a strong startup scene in Germany, but also in Berlin specifically, is not because we have such a good government. It's because we have amazing people who decided to found companies, and those companies became successful, and they became angel investors, and then they supported companies who founded again. And by now, everything that the German startup scene consists is homegrown. So it means it's not because we have a good government, it's besides having a government. And what you see by now is that our government is still not moving a lot. And they always say like, oh, let the startup scene do their thing. And they sometimes love to take photos with us. And they have like sometimes bullshit councils where they ask us for opinion and then never listen. But really, Germany is really bad because now all the countries around us are waking up. I can tell you, France had always a very small, and not bad, but a small startup scene. The thing is, because Germany was so successful, which is not because of the government, but because of the startup entrepreneurs, suddenly France got jealous. But France didn't go the same path like Germany. They didn't wait for founders to come up, but rather Macron went to the front and said, I want to make France a startup nation. And suddenly he launches initiatives. He does scale up Europe. They do like La France Tech, which is like an association supported by the French government who should support French founders in France, but also overseas. It's with a big tech focus. And now we really see that because the governments around us are so active supporting the startup scenes, they are overtaking us one after the other. And I think we're coming to your second question, do I think that will become better after the election? I have to be very careful being a CDU member, but even I don't think that my own party is understanding what they need to change to become competitive. So I'm really, really, really concerned. Also, when it comes to digitalization, we have such a, in my opinion, idiotic system with like the Federal Republic being responsible for some things, but then the countries like the provinces like Bavaria, North Rhine-Westphalia responsible for others. They can't agree and suddenly nothing happens. And this is like in terms of digitalization, also when it comes to, for example, digitalization of education, of schools, of public administration, it's such a big hurdle, and we are really standing in our own way right now. And I'm really, I don't want to say I'm pessimist because I'm always optimist, but with currently the candidates that we have for chancellors out there, Olaf Scholz, Anna Baerbock, and Armin Laschet, I really think none of them is a real digital startup person, unfortunately. And with that, I don't only mean startups itself, but generally innovation person. And you need such a person like Macron, who's an innovation person. You might think about Macron whatever you want on the side, but he really brings the innovativeness of his country, especially in the economic sector, forward. And I think, unfortunately, we don't have that right now. And that's the reason why I'm not voting for the CDU this year. I will not tell you which party I vote for, but I don't see that many parties who really want to focus on innovation. And I will give my vote this year to a party that does that. And I think it's not the CDU. I hope this answers the question a bit. So I didn't want to sound too pessimistic, but I think we have a lot of stuff to do, and we unfortunately have a government right now that's not moving forward.
All righty. Then if Alex does not have a follow-up question, let's go to maybe the question that Mike asked. Mike, you're also welcome to unmute yourself, show up on camera if you want to raise your question. So just let me know. Otherwise, I'm also happy to read it. But yeah, I think you're here.
Thanks, I can, but my Chromebook doesn't Zoom, so I don't want it to crash.
It's okay.
Yeah, thanks. Great conversation. Finn, my question was, how important is supply chain transparency and accountability in the success of the European cannabis industry? Because it's been brought up in the States a number of times that this is the Wild West, and one industrial processor might not really know what he gets, especially in the distillation process. And I talked to somebody else in France and they said it's no big deal. So I'm really curious because our startup has a really important technology that's patented and we're about to launch it. I don't know if I should be doing it in the EU or if it's just wasted marketing money.
Well, to be honest, I think it will become extremely important. It's already important for the medical supply chain because we need to prove exactly where our product is coming from. So there has been I don't want to say scandals, but there have been some situations where companies trick the government. So for example, for the medical supply chain, the government expects that you have EU GMP, like good manufacturing process, certified, like let's say cannabis flowers that are imported into the EU, but the cultivation needs to be under GMP EU standards. So what some companies are doing now, they import products from, for example, Uruguay into Malta, which is a state within the European Union who doesn't see that rule that strict. They import into their storage facility there, they wait for 2 weeks, and then they send it from a EU GMP certified location in the EU, which is Malta, to Germany. And then suddenly no one really knows where the cannabis originally came from. And the government is extremely bad in monitoring that. And it is a very big problem already in the medical space. It's to a certain degree also a problem in the CBD space. And it will definitely be a massive problem in the recreational space if the government at some point decides to launch it. So I don't know what company you do, but there's, for example, a US company that is like, especially in the US, very much spot on this. It's called Metric, METRC. So they, for example, won the tender with the Californian government to actually do the whole infrastructure and tracking and monitoring how the supply chain in cannabis works. And I think at the moment, because the industry is so new, no one is really focusing on that. But if you think like 2 or 3 years in the future, it will be a massive market. And I think neither the companies nor the government are yet aware of it, what's coming there. And I think if you, for example, position yourself very early now, even though no one really asks for it right now, and be the number one guy who has it, it can be something that, in my opinion, is really important in 2 to 3 years from now. So I actually think it's a good thing of doing that and thinking about it.
Would it be, so just a follow-up question, do you think it would be possible for the right technology to actually influence the legislators to create regulation that they can actually enforce?
Yeah,
versus
absolutely.
creating regulation that everybody hates because that bothers everybody, but allows them to put more ink on paper?
So I can tell you, like, the thing that at some point will convince regulators to legalize, it's the taxation. And the taxation you can only control by good monitoring systems. And for example, I had a discussion with a guy in Switzerland who is actually participating in the so-called pilot program of legalization. And what the Swiss still do, they put stamps on the cannabis to see where the taxation goes. And then the customs, they think, there's a stamp on it, so they write it down. So everything like this is done, can be done on a digital way these days. And I think that is definitely a very important puzzle piece. If you pitch and we do this right now, if you pitch a system to the government of how they could legalize, one thing is the taxation, but the second thing is how can they actually administer the taxation? And I think that's something where, for example, the software, it sounds like you're working on, can become very critical.
Thank you.
Amazing. And then we had a last question from Thomas. I just read it out if you don't mind. Because it goes back to where we started at the beginning with the fashion topic. Is there a cultural difference between Asian and European startups in the fashion and digital field?
Ooh, it's a very diverse set of questions.
I mean, you have a diverse background, right?
Yeah, exactly. That happens when you.
Also, actually, think it's maybe also a compliment for you being a very fashion person, right?
The next question would be how to brew the beer. So,
yeah.
Let me think about this question for a second. So, I think actually, if you ask, it's about fashion itself or the startups and digital. I mean, there's a lot of things. So, for example, I would say Australians have a very different fashion taste from Europeans, and Germans within Europe have a very different fashion taste from everyone else in Europe. So that is culturally very deep in our DNA. So, but that I think it doesn't affect startup. That affects the whole fashion industry. If you then think about the culture and what it means in the digital field, you can also say, I mean, imagine that about almost now 10 years ago, I founded The Iconic. We did a survey with our customers and we asked them, what's the most important thing when you shop online? And they said, I want to have my goods within 3 hours. So at The Iconic, 2011 in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane and Perth, it was from day one possible to order products on the Iconic and have them in 3 hours. In Germany, until today, you almost have not a single digital company that allows you to order within 3 hours. So you see this whole thing about convenience, about technology, especially in Australia, but also in Asia, I guess, is much more imminent in the customer's behavior. I mean, Gorillas is a good example of how this now suddenly comes also to Germany. And I guess it will only take about a year or so until Zalando has real-time delivery. And when you're in Berlin, there you get your stuff within half an hour. But Europeans are slower. And when it then comes to the whole thing around live shopping, measurability, making sure your clothes fit your body before you even order them, that's also something where I think Asians, but also Australians and also Americans, they're much more used already to use augmented reality to actually like measure themselves, to use digital technologies to actually see what works best and then make the buying decision. While in Europe, it's still a bit behind. So I believe that actually European fashion startups can learn a lot from Asian, but also American and Australian fashion startups, because I really think, and don't ask me why, is I think maybe we're just conservative as a continent. We are behind in technology quite a lot compared to Asia. Also, when it comes to the whole live fashion thing, like, you know, like we only know QVC or Home Shopping Europe, but in Asia and in Australia, it's already a big thing to do online live shopping events where like hundreds and thousands of people logging in at the same time, and you have influencers who are showing live stuff, and then you can instantly buy it by clicking on the video. That's something that's super huge already in Asia, but in Europe, it's almost not done. The question is, do you have not the right suppliers for it? Or is the audience, the customers, not ready for it yet? And that's an answer I cannot give. I guess it's a bit of both, but there's definitely a cultural difference, if that answers your question, Thomas. Good.
I think that's it.
That's it.
It's a wrap. Thank you so much, Finn. That was amazing. What was very wide-ranging. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to connect with you?
Good point. Do LinkedIn. I mean, the problem is I have like so many sales requests on LinkedIn every day, but I'm quite managing that well these days. So add me on LinkedIn, write me a small message, but then let's switch quickly from LinkedIn to email or telephone, because
and if Finn actually doesn't reply first time, just try it again and again.
Exactly. And that's very important. You have to be persistent with me because I get so many things every day.
All good.
So it's not meant in a bad way, but sometimes if people like write me on Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook, even if I remember that the next day I forgot which platform it was, and then suddenly boom, there's 5 other messages on top. And so you have to be persistent. But it's something that you need to keep in mind.
All good. Yeah, Finn, I hope we all catch up, like maybe at your brewery, right, in Berlin somewhere, or like the nice beer garden that you mentioned. Let's definitely keep in touch about that. And yeah, thank you again for your time. And also thank you guys for joining. As you know, we are doing this on a monthly basis. So if you have any particular topic that you're excited about, feel free to share it with us. And yeah, I would say that's a wrap, Mareike. Or did I forget anything?
No, everything is said. Thanks again for joining. Stay healthy. Enjoy the summer. Get vaccinated or not, that's up to you. Make a decision in life. And hope to see you next month, and stay subscribed, and looking forward to hopefully getting a beer and seeing you soon. Bye guys.
Bye.